Hi, Jen. Welcome to the College Advisor YouTube channel. I appreciate you taking your time this morning to be here and to talk to us about college essays. And I'm extra excited because we've been working together for at least 8 years, I think. And I continue to work with you because I think you're phenomenal in what you do. And I think it's really helpful for the kids. But the other thing that I like is because I'm working with the students and you're seeing their essays through Google Docs, not necessarily having discussions with them. And I view you as kind of a practice admissions reader, which we'll get to later. But I think it gives insight to the kids, and maybe we can talk a little bit about if they don't have someone professional that they're working with, maybe looking for a trusted person to help them flesh out more of what they're trying to express. But before we do that, I always like people to introduce themselves and talk just a little bit about your path in coming to be an English teacher, because I always like, if students are listening to this, to understand that not everybody has a straight path towards their career. And I know when you're young and starting out, that's often what everyone thinks they should do, but it isn't always the case. So,
Yeah.
without further ado,
Well, thank
Jenn
you for
Poole.
inviting me to talk with you. And I've been a teacher for 30 years now, 30 plus years, but it is not what I thought I would be doing when I was a high school senior. And my path to becoming a teacher has been like many people's paths into what they're doing. Lots of twists and turns, lots of unexpected meetings and discoveries and surprises. So when I went to college, I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and I went to UC Santa Barbara. All I knew at the time when I was going to college was I didn't want to go out of state, and most people I knew were at the UCs, and so that just seemed kind of a default path for me. And
Right.
I went to UC Santa Barbara for 2 years and realized by the time I was a sophomore that it really was not a great fit for me. I mean, the academics were terrific, but it was such a big school, and I was a small school kid, and I hadn't really realized that. And so I ended up transferring, and I transferred to Loyola Marymount University, which is a much smaller private university here in Los Angeles.
Right.
And it was the perfect fit. And when I was there, I was a film major. I had every intention of going into the behind the scenes work in film. I wanted to be a film editor. Um, and so took all kinds of film classes and did internships and things like that. And when I graduated from college, a friend and I, just kind of on a lark, because we had the time, we were able to do this. We moved to Japan, and we moved to Japan to teach English as a second language. We had a friend who did it. It sounded really cool. We thought we could do that. And we saw teaching as just a means to an end, the end
Right.
being that we could live in Japan. So it was there, living in Kyoto, Japan, where I discovered, oh my gosh, I am a teacher. This isn't just something I can do, you
To
know,
buy some time.
right. I am actually a teacher.
Okay.
And something was just awakened in me. And in hindsight, it's not surprising because I had benefited from some really spectacular teachers in my lifetime as a student. And I was always, I think, curious about the craft of teaching without really being aware of that curiosity, if
Sure.
that makes sense. So when I was in Japan, I actually applied to graduate programs here in the States. And my intention at the time was to get a PhD and teach at the college level, to be
Okay.
a professor of English literature, because I had minored in English. And anyway, I went to grad school at Loyola Marymount. I was a teaching fellow, so I was teaching alongside, my professors in the department. I recognized that the department, universal department in English at the college level is very impacted. There are many, many more applicants for professor positions than there are positions.
Sure.
And through just discernment, and I never imagined that I would teach at the high school level. But when I realized that I maybe teaching in college was not going to be my path, a mentor teacher of mine suggested that I teach at high school level.
Wow.
And I at first said no way. And then
Here
she
you
said,
are.
yeah, she said to me, "You're a teacher. Teachers teach." And so
Wow.
that's the long and the short of it. And I have been a high school teacher, English literature, composition, AP literature. I've been teaching AP literature for 20 years. I've taught up and down the 9 through 12 curriculum. I was department chair. I've developed curriculum.
Wow.
So that's my journey.
That's so cool to hear. And I'm really excited you became a teacher. And I wish I had had you when I was in high school, but I didn't. But I get the next best thing. I get to work alongside of you with our students, and you help them to their own abilities because not everyone's a fabulous writer
Right.
and the purpose
And
of the
writing's
essay.
hard, even for the really strong writers. Writing's hard.
Right. And this isn't about being a fabulous writer. It's more about figuring out how to tell a story.
Yeah.
And
Well, it is
so,
a particular, very unique assignment.
yes, which I know a lot of kids struggle with. And so, again, for those who aren't able to work with someone or need some extra tips, I thought we could start, even though we just started, but
Sure.
start by giving maybe 3 to 5 tips of what you think is really important when you're setting out to write the college essay, which I also think, by the way, for kids, high school students, rising seniors to work on it over the summer and
Yeah,
don't wait to the fall. So if anybody's listening,
100%.
start doing this now.
Yeah. So actually you saying that adds a tip. And I think maybe that's the first and the most important, and it applies to all kinds of writing, but especially this writing. It's going to be a process. No student, regardless of how strong they are as a writer, no student should approach this as I'm just going to churn it out in one night or one afternoon and it's going to be done.
Yeah,
That for a really strong essay to come about, the student has to really engage in a process of brainstorming, outlining, drafting, getting feedback, revising, getting feedback, revising, going through that until the essay is there in content and organization. Uh,
right.
so that's the first good tip for everybody to know.
I think that's great because I know this is not what anybody wants to do over the summer, and it would be nice to get it done in one. And let me back up a little because we didn't mention, when we're talking about the essays, we're talking about the common application PIQs. Because we're in California, we talk a lot about the UCs, which are different. And then throughout, there's different colleges with their own prompts and all of that. But this is more of a general, how to figure out how to answer those. So anyway, so what are some of your other tips that you would
Yeah.
share?
Yeah, and I think that they apply no matter whether it's a Common App essay, the UC personal statements, the some schools have supplements, some students are
Right,
applying to honors programs. They're all going to be asking variations of the same thing, and what they want to know is about the student. So all of this writing is personal. So the other tips I have, first and foremost, for a student to remember that they're writing a personal narrative. A narrative is to tell a story. So they're telling a story about a focused aspect or experience of their life that they're bringing to life
hmm,
for the reader. You're not writing your entire autobiography. You're giving the reader a glimpse into something that you do, something you've experienced, so that they can understand who you are, what matters to you, uh,
Right.
how you think. Um, so another really important tip is to choose your topic from experiences that you feel convey something interesting or important about you that you're excited to write about. Hilary and I often say to students, there's no magic topic,
Right.
no single topic that is the key topic. Um, I've always told students, my own students down through the years, writing's always two things. It's what and it's how. What is the topic? How is the way that you write about that topic? So rather than trying to second guess what might be interesting to this reader you're never going to meet, what is something from your own life that you're excited to write about? You have more to say than you could ever get down on the page about that experience, moment, relationship, background, whatever it is you're writing about.
Right.
Um, so that you have a personal passion for what you have to say. Um, Going back to that idea of writing being a process, what I've long said to students about this college app essay, the drafting of it is, even though you're going to always have a word count limit, whether it's the Common App or the UC statements or supplements, ignore that word count while you're drafting.
Okay.
Take it off your screen or don't pay attention to it, because really editing for word count should be the last thing I think that's done in that writing process. The most
Right.
important is getting out all that content and the organization. And finally, and this goes back to narration, you're telling a story. Good storytelling adheres to the rule of show, don't tell. So showing means including concrete, specific, personalized details in your essay that no one else could include in their story because this is your story.
Right. It's unique to that particular person.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think you've also talked about popping off the page.
Yeah. Yeah, really, why is the essay important in a college application? Because this is your one opportunity to really become a three-dimensional person
Right.
to the admissions reader. Your essay makes you kind of rise off the page or out of the screen, shake the hand of the person that's reading your application, and it then differentiates you from all the other applicants whose, essays they're reading.
Right. And I know, I mean, we'll talk about this later. There's so much we could talk about, but we
Mhm.
want to just kind of stay focused. But I think too, maybe, since we've been working together for so many years, when kids start the process, they think it has to be something big and monumental. And it's a slice of life. And we've had kids write about skateboards, about cheese, about fountain pens, like things that you would think, really, that's what you're going to write about? But it's the way they executed it. And like you said, those essays popped off the
Yeah.
page. And I think that's important. Speaking of important, that brings me to my next question, which why is the essay important in the college applications? And, you know, I can answer that question, but I want you to. I know these days there's a lot of talk about grade inflation. And these days, not everybody has straight A's, certainly, but more and more kids are able to get A's.
Mhm.
And so, do you feel that the essay is taking on a different level of importance given that?
Yeah, and I think college admissions officers are saying that as well.
Right,
The high school students, by and large, are going to have similar content in their applications. Their grades are going to be different from each other's, their test scores may be different, but they're going to have things like their activities. They're going to have things like their AP scores. Um,
Right.
a lot of data that is rather impersonal, and it doesn't mean that it's not important for the
No, I know. I know. I don't want
but
to discount those
it's
days, you know?
right, but it's data that's kind of repeated across the spectrum of college applications. The
Right.
name of the student, the place they live, their age, their GPA, their course grades, their test scores, their activities. So that really doesn't personalize them.
Right.
It can hint at things that they're interested in. But when it comes down to an admissions officer with a variety of applications in front of them, how are they going to differentiate among these AP scores and these grades and so forth?
Right.
And so the essay is, again, the place where the student has the best opportunity. Um, it's the best tool for them to really introduce themselves as a person, as a unique, individuated individual to the admissions officer.
Right.
And convey who they are. A lot can come through an essay beyond the topic itself. The way that the essay is written, the kinds of reflective insight that the student shares in their essay can convey a lot to the reader about not only what they've experienced, but what matters to them, the kinds of
Right.
relationships they have with people, their goals, their sensibilities. Um, and so that essay then can be, in some cases, the deciding factor. So
Right.
even though it's a personal narrative and it's telling a story, it's not just telling a story to tell a story. We could all do that. But
Sure.
it's telling a story, and that essay is intended to be persuasive. That the story that you're telling, whatever it is you're sharing about yourself in your essay, that's going to persuade the admissions officer to say, this student, this kid,
This
this kid would be a great fit.
this kid, and when we say fit, this is a kid who's going to bring something to our
Yeah,
university other than they're smart and they're studious or their
right,
activities or whatever. This is
right.
a
Because I
person with
think that's a given, and we've long said that to students in their essays. If they say things like, I really want a college education, or I'm a serious student, my academics matter to me. And it's kind of like, no kidding, you're applying to college. That's a
right,
given,
right,
and that's great, not to demean that. That's great. And who are you?
right.
What else are you about?
And I think it's really important. And I know as a parent, and you're a parent, it's really hard not to hover and look at your kid's essay and go, what did you write? And maybe you should write about this, or maybe you should write about that. Because whatever perspective a student is bringing, it needs to be in their own voice. Because I know we've worked over the years, and well-meaning parents think they're helping their kid by steering them towards a quote unquote fabulous essay, but the admissions readers know how kids think at a certain age
And what they sound like.
and what
And
they
what they
sound
sound
like.
like. And it's important for the student as well to have ownership in this
Right,
process.
right,
If they're not writing about a topic that they truly care about, if they're not using the words that are authentic to them,
right,
they're going to feel disenfranchised.
right,
They're going to feel like this isn't really their application.
right. And I think it's part of the process of working your way towards becoming an adult. You're going to go off to school. You know, we have the whole thing about AI, which we didn't even, put on our list of things to talk about. But, certainly AI brings a different voice, which everybody's talking about and being careful about using that. And I know we tell the clients that we work with, just don't use it.
Yeah.
Start with your
Yeah.
own voice.
Well, because AI also doesn't know, again, going back to those details, AI doesn't know the name of your fifth grade math teacher, or,
Right,
what the sun felt like that day that you were on the beach, or, all of these things that are personal.
right. So I know we've seen kids also struggle over the years of coming up with a topic. They feel like they have nothing to say. Do you have suggestions for them of if they're struggling, how do they come up with something?
Um, First, remembering there's no magic topic. You
Yeah,
know, we've had I know I've worked with a lot of students down through the years, just students of mine, seniors in high school, who feel like if they don't have a dramatic or traumatic story to tell,
yeah,
that they're not going to be able to write a compelling and interesting essay. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. Um, I would say students really need to sit with the prompts. The Common App gives students 6 different focused prompts that focus them on different aspects of life experience. And the same thing with the UCs. They give them 8 possibilities.
mhm,
And what I love about all of those prompts is that they focus on a wide variety of things that are part of life, part of a student's experience. And that those prompts are both specific enough, but also broad enough that students can easily connect them to their lives in some way. So I
sure,
think in the first place, the student has to let go of the idea that they need some kind of serious, heavy-hitting story, like, they worked in a lab that contributed to the curing of a disease, or,
right,
right? Like you said, we had a student one year who wrote in response to the Common App essay prompt about something that captivates you and makes you lose all track of time. And that student wrote about his passion for fountain pens.
right,
And, it revealed a lot about him in addition to he uses fountain pens, and he, really enjoys this kind of old-fashioned writing implement.
sure,
So I think students, if they're struggling with a topic, and the most common thing we hear is, I don't know what to write about. Okay, so sit with those prompts.
right,
Go through those prompts, identify the one or two or three that are most interesting to you, and either because different people have different ways of brainstorming, either do
sure,
a brainstorm that's just a brain dump where you're just writing kind of stream of consciousness on the page,
right,
or bullet point possible things that you could draw from your life to connect to that prompt. The most important thing is that the topic again has to be important to the writer,
sure,
not, is this going to catch someone's attention, or my mom wants me to write about this, or my sister wrote about this thing.
right,
What does the student think is interesting about themselves? Because ultimately, what the essay is conveying is personal traits, personal qualities, personal skills,
sure,
and I think above all, self-knowledge,
right,
right? So the topic becomes the vehicle for sharing these things about yourself, whether you're writing about something maybe more lighthearted, like your passion for cheese boards, because
yeah,
you do that, or being captivated by fountain pens, or something
Uh,
maybe you're hitting, like um
something about the environment. We've had
right,
kids from when they were
right,
young got focused on the environment, and
right,
that sort of stuck that value
right,
of
right,
caring about your environment stayed with this person, you know, and still is while
right,
he's in college. And
right,
so I was going to say too, I think kids, because there's so much pressure and there's so much noise out there about overachieving,
yeah,
and you have to be this amazing, like you said, cure some crazy disease. But then that undermines, and I don't want to say just regular kids, but when you look at your life, like I see what so many of my students are doing, I couldn't do half of
yeah,
as much of
yeah,
what they're doing. And I think to recognize that you're important, you have beliefs, you have values, you just maybe never been asked or thought to talk about it.
right. And again, the prompts cover so many different parts of a teenager's life experience,
Right.
right? They're not written for grown adults. They're
No.
written for 16, 17, 18-year olds, so
Right.
they cover things like background. They cover things like an obstacle, a challenge, a setback. They cover things like a time when you experienced gratitude, being grateful for somebody doing something for you, so, and that's the other thing is you're not writing your whole autobiography. I say this to
No.
students all the time. It is a snapshot. It is a moment, an experience. We have students who write about, things that are part of their everyday lives, like maybe their faith tradition or an activity that they're involved in. So it's an ongoing part of their life. But they give us a day in that life, an
Sure.
experience in that life. So that I think that's another way to kind of help students, um, not feel as anxious and stressed around, I have to have this.
Amazing.
Right, because again, writing is always two things. It's what and it's how. And so the how of it, the details that are included, the tone, the personal information that's shared, that's enough for the reader to learn a lot about the student.
100%.
You know?
I think with that, it's perfect to also talk about topics to avoid
Yeah. Okay. Um,
in a quick kind of nutshell.
yeah. So there are topics that we encourage students to avoid because we've heard from college reps themselves that these topics are overdone.
Right.
They've reached the point of being cliche. There's not really much that's fresh about them, and of course, we put an asterisk there because if a student
Sure.
says to us, I really want to write about this topic, then we'll guide them through it. But generally, what we advise them against and college reps advise against are the won or lost athletic event, the won or lost championship, the won or lost elected position at school or role in the play, um,
Right.
writing about the challenging AP course that you didn't think you wanted to take, but you did and you persevered. And again, that's great. We're not,
I
demeaning,
know. I know.
we're just saying that that information is in your application elsewhere. It's in your
Right.
transcript, your grade is there. Um, what I call the one and done service activity, so the house build in an area to help disadvantaged people. Again, awesome that a student participates in something like that. But if it's a one and done, college reps are telling us that the essays tend to be very cliche.
Sure.
Look how happy these poor people were, and now I feel so much more grateful for my life. The
Yeah.
um
Which
if
may be true, but
right again, but it's maybe not the strongest, most compelling
sure.
window into the student. If a student has been engaged in a service activity for a long time, then absolutely, I would say
Right.
write about that because there's more detail there. There's more context. Um, so those topics tend to result in kind of cliche, formulaic essays that don't really differentiate and distinguish the student. You and I have also long counseled students to be very cautious in writing about death, divorce,
Divorce.
and drugs.
Right.
What I've long said to students is that these topics can lead to really heavy kind of confessional essays
Right.
or heavy angry essays. I've had students that want to write about, the breakup of their family, which needs to be written about, but maybe not for the college app,
Right.
because those kinds of heavy confessional essays don't serve the primary purpose of the Common App or the college app essay, which is you want to convince the admissions rep, to admit you to the school, to put
Right.
your application in the admit pile. So no matter the focus, no matter the topic, it has to be you and the traits, qualities, skills, self-awareness that you're proud of. And again, to echo what you said a few minutes ago, they're going to be assets to the school they're applying to.
Right, right, right. I know. And we could talk about this
Yeah.
all forever, but um, I know we've talked, we kind of outlined this, but are there components you would suggest regardless of the topic of just what makes an essay stand out?
Yeah. So back to show, don't tell. I think
Hmm.
that's the first thing for me always. A really
Right.
compelling personal narrative is going to show, it's not going to tell. So rather than the student saying, this experience made me the person I am now, don't tell me that. Show me that. What's the example of that? What are the details of your life that show what you could otherwise tell?
Okay. Which
Because
is hard to do.
it is hard to do. But again, that's where, right, you lean into the concrete details, the specific personalized details that nobody else could have in their essay. So,
Right.
that includes things like names of people, names of places, colors, images.
Songs.
Right, song titles, appropriate figurative language. I mean, some of the things that you learn in your English class when you're analyzing literature, but those are part of writing, and
Right.
that's what makes a narrative really stand out are those personalized details. Because what you're then doing is you're making it possible for the reader to really see and hear
Mm.
and kind of be present for
Right.
what it is you're writing about. Those kinds of details, the concrete, personalized, specific details convey the who, the where, the what, the when, the how. So instead of telling the reader something, you're showing them through
Right.
details.
Right.
And in addition to that, the show don't tell, I think a standout essay always includes relevant, purposeful insight and reflection, that it shows depth,
Right.
that it shows that the writer understands the assignment, right? And we have often counseled students, don't wait to the end of your essay to just tack on a few sentences that say, as a result of this activity, I learned the value of compassion or whatever. Like,
Right.
great, but don't tack that on at the end. Weave in that insight, that reflection throughout. I often say that a personal narrative essay is a combination of, narrative paragraphs that contain details about whatever the topic is, along with context paragraphs, background information, that insight, that depth.
Right.
And this is a challenging kind of writing, because it's not often taught. It's not often part of our classes, but students keep journals. If they keep diaries, they're doing that.
Right.
Everyday conversation, they're doing this.
Right. It's getting them to understand that they
Yeah.
have a lot to say.
Yeah. And that you're not telling a story simply to tell it. You've chosen this topic about a slice of your life because you believe it conveys important things about you, those
Right.
qualities, those traits, those skills, and who you are, what matters to you based on where you come from, what you do, what you've experienced.
Right, right. So putting this also because I feel like college admissions has this, it's true, this mystery, this mystique to it, because there's a lot that goes on behind closed doors that none of us have access to. And so you, I think, have come up with a description of who's reading these
Yeah.
essays and giving students a little glimmer understanding of what it's all about when they send their application in and who's reading the writing.
Yeah. And I think this is important for students to consider because too, their applications are not being read by AI. They're being read by real people. And those people are looking to make just a momentary connection with the student whose application is in front of them, which is
Right.
another reason why students want to do their own writing, right? So, What we know about college admissions reps is they tend to be young women in their 20s. Um, they can be reading hundreds and hundreds of applications in a season. I talked with a rep this last spring, who is a rep for a private university on the East Coast, and she said that this season she read 500 plus applications.
Oh,
So it's a lot, right? And so my rule, which might seem extreme, is I say to students, envision 12, 12, 12, that the person reading your application has been reading applications for 12 hours. It's now 12 midnight. They have 12 more to go. And so when they get to yours, what's going to hook them? What's going to capture their attention? What's going to make them linger, and hear you and see you so that by the end of it, they move your application to the, admit pile.
right, right.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jen. Anything else you think that we have talked?
Yeah, I would say kind of a last point to keep in mind, and this goes back to something that you said at the beginning about when it comes to choosing topics. There are lots of people who, any student has lots of people who love them, who are concerned for them, who want them to, you know, get to the right school, whatever that school might be. But when it comes to getting feedback on the essay, I would advise students to be really conservative about who they share their essay with. Not because it's secret, but because the people who love them are going to have lots of ideas and lots of opinions
Yes,
about what their essay needs. And not all of those opinions are necessarily going to be useful or relevant. And with this particular writing assignment, the goal is for this essay to persuade the admissions rep to admit them.
sure.
And so whoever they share their essay with, it has to be somebody who knows what a college app essay is and what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
Because otherwise, they might be getting feedback that isn't going to serve that purpose, or that person's going to read their essay and miss crucial areas that need more development, more explanation, more detail, and that's not going to serve their essay. So I would say students should solicit feedback from, their school counselor, an English teacher, a writing coach if they're working with a writing coach. But just to be very cautious about that.
Sure, sure. Too many cooks in the kitchen, I always
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. And then that can dilute the student's voice and it can become very frustrating because then it becomes confusing.
Right.
Like my parting anecdote about this is I had a student who she was very serious. She was applying to a pretty high profile school. She wanted to major in the sciences. Her plan is to be a doctor and she's in medical school now. But
Wow.
when she was writing her essay was about a pretty serious topic, and she had finished it. We had edited it for word count. It was ready to go. And she looked at me and said, but where do I put the laugh line? And I said, and she said, yeah, the laugh line. I was told by, and she named somebody, that every college application essay needs to have humor, needs to make the reader laugh. And I was like, oh, uh, no.
No.
Like your tone is going to match your topic, and you've written in the right tone here for your topic. No, we're not going to just come up with something and shoehorn.
Punchline, yeah.
Right. So a well-meaning person had said to the student, "Oh, you need to do this thing." And
Right.
it actually wasn't. I was glad she told me because I was able to steer her away from that. But that would
Yeah.
be my last advice for
I
students.
think that's perfect because there's a lot of noise out there and a lot of people who say this is what you should do, on and on. And yeah, it's like going to the doctor. You go, Google's not a doctor, you go to an actual
Right.
doctor, a specialist to get your answers. And I think that holds true for college admissions and putting your best foot forward, but having people, the appropriate people around you guiding you.
Yeah, because it 100% has to begin and end with the student themselves. We've had students who have said, "Well, my mom wants me to write about this topic,"
Yeah.
but the student doesn't have much to say about that topic, right?
Right.
That's where
Right.
you're back to choose the thing that you can write about, that you
Yes.
have the details, you have the personal insight because it's impacted you.
I agree with you. And I think that's a good place to end is I agree with you.
But I'm sorry, there's just one more thing that
Okay, okay.
because you and I have talked about it before. I just want to dissuade students from, like, it's fine to refer to things that happened in your childhood and middle
Yes.
school, right? But your essay cannot strictly be about just this thing that happened to you in middle school. Like if you're going to write about something that happened when you were much younger, you have to bring it into the present and connect it to who you are now. I'm sorry I didn't say that earlier. That just
No,
occurred.
I thought about it and I didn't say it
Yeah, I
either.
think that's
But
also an important thing to
uh,
keep in mind because they
uh,
want to know who you are now.
exactly, not in starting in drama in elementary school or middle school and all of that.
Yeah.
Correct, correct. You know what? One last tip, and then I promise we're going to end. Um, I was thinking, you can look up essays online, and I think as examples, kids can look up essays. I think that's good to get an idea. I also think I would share some caution with doing that just because it's easy to get sort of influenced by someone's topic or the way they write. It's just to give you a general idea. But when you're looking at those essays, we've talked about it with our own kids. What did you learn about this
Yeah.
person? All of that, all the things we've talked about, and think about it from that perspective, not, ooh, maybe I could write what they wrote about in a
Yeah, no,
different
and
way.
I mean, I'm a big believer in models actually. As a writing teacher, I always put
So,
models in front of my students, and I do with the college app essay as well, not for the purpose of copy this topic, but instead look at the range of topics that students write about. Because going back to students that feel that if they don't have something big and dramatic and whatever, that they don't have a good focus for their essay, seeing a variety of approaches can
right,
maybe make them relax a little bit and realize, wow, I could write about virtually anything.
right,
But then also how the different essays are written. And like you just said, what do you learn about the student? So I've said that to my own students. Read these models. What makes this a strong essay? Like looking at the writing.
sure,
Talk about details when we talk about the organization and then what do you learn about the student who's written the essay? What kind of person are they?
right.
So I think looking at models can be useful if the student is doing it with those two things in mind, just to get a sense of the wide variety of topic, and
Okay,
then seeing what makes an effective essay from the writing.
that's great. Yes. Okay, Jen, thank you so much
Hillary, thanks for
for
letting me
meeting
talk.
with me today. And I hope this is helpful for others out there. And
Daunting. It's a daunting
it is, it
pressure
is.
thing, but just breathe, go through the process.
It'll,
There's no one right way.
and you'll end up where you're supposed to be. Even though
Absolutely.
it may not seem like that, you will.
Yeah.
So thank you.